Leading Education Towards Successful Teaching and Lasting Knowledge, or Let's Talk, is a podcast that discusses relevant topics and issues in education management and governance. Hosted by Dr. Evelie Serrano, Dr. Monica Walet, and Dr. Emely Dicolen, Let's Talk is an extension initiative of the Institute for Governance and Rural Development, College of Public Affairs and Development, University of the Philippines, Los Baños. Dr. Evelie is an associate professor and the director of IGRD CPAf. An education enthusiast and lifelong learner, she is passionate about improving the quality of teaching and learning through teacher training and education. An assistant professor at IGRD CPAf, Dr. Monica has occupied academic and leadership positions in higher education institutions in the Philippines and Singapore. A registered psychologist, she is a well-known mental health advocate and speaker who designs and facilitates training programs aimed at promoting mental health and well-being. Dr. Emely is an associate professor and currently the college secretary of UP Manila's National Teacher Training Center for the Health Professions. A dynamic administrator and education manager, she has introduced innovative programs and projects in various institutions of higher learning. Let's Talk, every Wednesday on the UPLB College of Public Affairs and Development Facebook page as we lead education toward successful teaching and lasting knowledge.
Hello everyone! We're back to wrap up the first season of Let's Talk. And in this final episode, we'll be reflecting on what we have learned from the past episodes and explore how we should approach the future of education given all the changes and challenges we are experiencing. I am Evelie Serrano, and with me as usual are the Wonder Women of Let's Talk, Dr. Emely Dicolen and Dr. Monica Walet. It's been a joy sharing with you our learnings and insights on education and its myriad of issues the past 3 months. Dr. Emely and Dr. Monica, kumusta kayo? How are you feeling now that we're about to end the first season of Let's Talk?
Well, ako syempre feeling accomplished. Kasi naman, di ba, despite our super hectic schedule as BWPs, mga babaeng walang pahinga, we still found time to do the previous episodes of Let's Talk. And hopefully, sana naman, no, yung mga listeners and followers natin ay natuto, no, from our previous episodes.
Well, ako, mixed emotions talaga. Happy, unang-una, that we have imparted relevant information and shared experiences about our lives, personally and professionally in this format, especially at the time of the pandemic. Pero I will miss you. Our usual recording sessions, kung banding na din, no? So, kettlebells lang. It's so aesthetic.
No, dapat lang na ma-miss natin ang isa't isa, di ba?
Relate much tuloy ako dyan sa mixed emotions na yan, Dr. Monica. It feels great to have learned with you and at the same time, medyo bothered kasi based on what we have discussed the past weeks, ang daming issues and challenges pa na kailangan pang harapin at hanapan ng solusyon. I think we can all agree that the pandemic has reshaped almost every aspect of school. Because of the challenges of the pandemic, educators have been rethinking instruction, assessment, classroom management, among other things. In the case of the Philippines, schools have adopted flexible learning and remote learning, which have changed the landscape of education. The pandemic has accelerated digital transformation in education. ICT has become a critical ingredient of quality teaching and learning. And the digital divide has been made more evident as learners from poor families and marginalized communities struggle to cope with the demands of our evolving education landscape. Now, with these things in mind, Dr. Emely and Dr. Monica, how do you see the future of education? Promising ba ito or problematic?
Future of education. Ayon sa aking bolang kristal. Bolang kristal. Hindi. Seryoso. Na syempre, I am on the promising side kasi given the efforts naman that we have exerted to retool ourselves, to be updated with current knowledge and skills, plus the proper attitude to be able to adapt to the new possible. Sabi nga nila, hindi lang new normal, kundi new possible. I think we will perform better. Kailangan lang talaga ng reframing, and look into the possibilities rather than focusing on the impossible.
Ay nako, Doc Emely talaga, the optimist. Nakakahawa. No? But actually, I am also confident that we will be able to surpass these hurdles posed by the pandemic and the advancement of technology to assist educators and learners to meet the challenges of teaching and learning. There are, of course, problems we encounter and are continuously facing, like infrastructure, learning loss or learning poverty, disengagement of students. All this were confirmed in researches and studies we discussed in our previous episodes.
Yes, I believe sa panahon ngayon, it helps to be an optimist but still in touch with reality. Having said that, what do you think, Dr. Monica and Dr. Emely, are the biggest threats to Philippine education right now? And how do we deal with these threats?
Alam mo, Dr. Evelie, the impact of the pandemic has created an imbalance in education that schools and higher education institutions have to restructure or redesign. Private schools are faced with dwindling enrollment, depreciating fixed assets, and increasing cost of operations, even though the setup of most learning centers now are online or remote. Well, we have observed students migrating to public schools due to economic reasons. And according to the Catholic Education Association of the Philippines, or CPAf, may mga ilang Catholic schools na nag-declare na magsara na. Actually, isa dito yung College of the Holy Spirit in Manila.
Di ba diyan kayo nag-aral at nagkakilala ni Dr. Emely? Ang tagal ng school na yan, di ba?
Oo, tama ka, Doc Evelie. 100 years ng school na to. Doon kami nagkakilala as students ni Dr. Emely at doon din kami maging colleague. She was with the religious education, I was with the College of Arts and Sciences and the Guidance Department. So kaya nga with that, isa sa mga reason ng pagsara ay ang pagbagsak nga ng enrollment. The pandemic had a huge impact on this school that most students' parents were jobless and could not pay their tuition.
Tama, Doc Monica and Dr. Evelie. Malaki talaga yung naging impact ng COVID-19. Pero syempre, marami pang ibang mga factors din naman. And speaking of threat, for me, siguro it's not a threat perhaps, but really more of a recurring challenge. And I think the availability and accessibility of teaching learning resources will remain to be a challenge. Sa tingin ko kasi, hindi pa na-maximize ang use ng media as a tool na pwedeng gamitin para magturo. Like, I don't know kung anong extent na nagagamit ng mga guro. Kunyari, ang television, ang radio, para magturo sa mga malalayong lugar na hindi abot ng internet. It sounds primitive, di ba? Parang sinaunang panahon. Pero sa akin palagay, ito ngayon ang dapat nating bigyan ng pansin at mas i-develop pa para mas maaabot natin ang mga mag-aaral na walang access sa technology or even textbooks. Sabi nga back to the basics siguro. Baka at this point, yun din ang kailangan natin. Nakita ko pang isang challenge, yung thorough review and assessment ng mga modules na ginagamit ng ating mga guro. Alam naman natin, di ba, mga bali-balita na may mga ilang mga puna at ako mismo, nasasaksihan ko ito na may mga kailangang ayusin dun sa mga modules na ginawa or ginagawa ng mga guro. Dahil hindi naman natin sila masisi kasi marahil kulang din naman yung kanilang kasanayan para maghanda ng mga modules na ito. So, sa tingin ko talaga kailangan ng masusing assessment sa ating mga learning resources na ito at yung kaukulang training na din sa mga guro upang lalong higit na magamit ng tama itong mga learning resources na ito.
Tama kayo dyan, Dr. Emely. Maraming ang nagrereklamo sa mga mali-mali modules, di ba? Minsan may mga pagkakamali pa sa content.
Tama.
And the sad part is, kung ano man ang ma-absorb dito ng mga estudyante, hindi lang knowledge, pati yung values, ay posibleng madala nila hanggang pagtanda.
Mhm.
Maging proliferator pa sila ng fake news because of that. And speaking of fake news, another major threat to Philippine education, I believe, is the proliferation of fake news and disinformation. Our education sector needs to do something about them, as fake news and disinformation can affect how people learn and interpret information. However, fake news and disinformation appear to be extra challenging, extra challenging na ma-overcome, as educators themselves fall victim, to fake news and disinformation.
Mhm.
And so because of this, an education reform, I think, is imperative. We need to find ways on how we can educate the young to be more discerning of information that they read or receive. Lifelong learning and discussion communities, rigorous training in the scientific method, diversity in the classroom, and broad cross-disciplinary education are just some of the identified strategies by which schools can fight fake news and disinformation. And we'll talk more about this na lang next season.
Wow, so
Deserve
interesting.
niya ang isang
Oo,
episode.
exciting yan.
Something
Yes.
to look forward to.
Correct.
Yan. So moving forward, considering all the challenges and threats to education, how do we ensure quality education in the country? What specific interventions should we prioritize? Dr. Emely?
Yeah, I think to ensure quality education in the country, it is imperative that we, educators, need to prepare our learners to be able to face a world characterized by volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. Ito yung naririnig natin na VUCA. Ang tanong dito ay paano? Paano natin to gagawin? I think we should start it with our curriculum. Paul Magnuson, Director of Educational Research in an American school, suggests that we should provide some space or air in the content that we provide to our students. We should allow some space in the curriculum so that it doesn't become too content heavy and structured. We can allow our students to do some independent learning activities, of course, with our close supervision as teachers and facilitators of learning. And corollary to this is instruction. Kasi 'di ba, traditionally parang kapag nag-off task ang mga learners natin, parang it's a no-no kasi sa tingin natin, there's no learning taking place. Kasi hindi nila sinusunod yung, let's say, formula or yung routine na binibigay natin sa kanila. Pero siguro we should allow them to explore as long as we make sure that outcomes are clear, and getting there is for them to discover. As teachers, we should trust that these off-task behaviors are necessary learning opportunities for them. And lastly, in terms naman of assessment, palagay ko, hindi naman necessary na lahat ng gagawin ng estudyante sa classroom ay kailangan ng assessment, lalo na ang summative assessment. What is more helpful, I believe, is to prepare our students to be VUCA ready. That is, to provide formative assessments where you as the teacher and their classmates, as their peers, can give feedback on their tasks without having them feel judged. By doing this, we are teaching our students to become more sensitive and respectful of their classmates, and they learn to give and receive feedback and learn from the process.
Naku, you're very right, Dr. M. And just to add from an organizational point of view, that the impact of the pandemic has created numerous VUCA faults and fissures that educators and leaders in education have to patch up these discrepancies and uncertainties. And so to ensure this quality education, we need responsive leaders. I remember Dr. Almaden of Northern Bukidnon State College, one of our speakers in CPAf, during the HEI leadership talk. She mentioned that for HEIs or higher education institutions to survive, it is imperative that HEI leadership requires continuous adaptation and transformation into agile learning organizations. To ensure quality education, we have to rely on school leadership practices towards a more context-responsive leadership, implying new programs that will mold graduates and future leaders with adequate competencies, skills, knowledge, and attitudes suited to the current and ongoing outcomes of the pandemic condition. In an article by Matsuda, he proposed that students must graduate with a growth mindset, a mindset based on 21st century skills such as collaboration, critical thinking, communication, creativity, and compassion. This will capacitate our future leaders to be capable of addressing the extraordinary VUCA challenges. And lastly, school leaders, on the other hand, should prioritize their own health and well-being so that they can be able to help others. School leaders are increasingly confronted to manage emotional responses of their staff and students brought about by the pandemic, like anxiety, depression, anger, loss, and even grief. Thus, self-care programs should be part of the formation of well-rounded and well-adjusted leaders.
I strongly agree, Dr. Monica. And reflecting on what you and Dr. Emily have shared, no, clearly there is a need for us to future-proof education to ensure that our students learn and develop a wide range of skills, competencies, and values needed to thrive in our increasingly complex learning environment. And we'll talk more about that in the next season of Let's Talk. Another thing, no, to look forward to.
Yes.
Tama.
Meron palang may
Meron
mga
na-
season.
May ano na
Oo.
tayo, no? May mga naka-line up na tayong mga topics to discuss.
Oo nga eh.
Exactly. So anyway, as we end the first season of Let's Talk, Dr. Emily and Dr. Monica, do you have any final words of wisdom to share with our listeners? Let's start with Dr. Monica.
Ay, nako. Well, 2 years living amidst the pandemic. We have lost some, but gained more, I believe. I would like to believe that despite the disruption caused by COVID-19, we have a lot of things to be grateful for. Appreciating the available resources, we all have the capacity to give and can stimulate growth and strengthen our purpose in forging leaders of the future. Future-proof, ika nga.
Tama ka dyan, Dr. Monica. Di nga ba, sabi ni David Cooper Ryder, no, sa Appreciative Inquiry, in every piece of art, there is beauty. So I believe sa kabila ng mga hindi magandang bagay na dulot ng COVID-19 sa ating edukasyon, maraming mga magagandang bagay din naman na naidulot ito. Kailangan lang talaga ng reframing, no? Reshaping, sabi niyo nga kanina. And see these things from a different lens or perspective. Kailangan lang ng pangunawa at pagtanggap sa mga bagay-bagay. Tanggapin natin na bilang mga guro, hindi na lamang pagtuturo ang ating pangunahing tungkulin, kundi ang ihanda ang ating mga learners to be volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous ready.
Amen to that, Dr. Emily. Indeed, we educators and education managers have a greater role to play as we aim to reframe the future of education. All in all, in this first season of Let's Talk, we were able to discuss relevant issues in education management and governance. We've talked about blended learning and remote learning in our episodes, Getting Ready for Blended Learning and the Perceived Impact of Remote Learning. We've also explored the concepts of learning loss and learning gain in our episode From Learning Loss to Learning Gain. And then just last episode, we had an engaging discussion on teaching and learning during the pandemic and discussed the challenges in our way forward. And one way forward, as we have discussed today, is to reframe the future of education. As we strive to overcome the challenges and threats to education, we need to make education more responsive, more meaningful, and more collaborative. Cliche as it may sound, we should all work together. Different social institutions must work hand in hand to combat pressing issues that impact our education sector. Education, as we know, is a catalyst for social and economic development. Now more than ever, we should therefore be able to lead education towards successful teaching and lasting knowledge. No goodbyes at marami pa tayong pag-uusapan. Until the next season of
Let's
Let's
talk!
talk!